Hey listeners, this is the English adaptation of Humo, Murder and Silence in El Salvador. Para español, vuelva al feed y selecciona el título en español. Join the conversation on social media by tagging @ThisIsSonoro. The episode you're about to listen to contains descriptions of physical violence and stories of victims of disappearance. Listener discretion is advised. It had been nearly 3 weeks since the discovery of the mass grave in Chalchuapa. The news was growing cold, and the government had completely locked down communication about the case. No one was talking. Reporter Bryan was sitting at his computer, smoking a cigarette and drinking coffee when he got an email. It was a document, one that would change the course of his life. Bryan opened it and sat staring at his screen in disbelief. They had it. Hugo Osorio's confession. In the document, the accused murderer explained to the police investigators all the ways in which 13 people died in his house. He recounted details, names, ages. He described his strategy for acquiring victims, how he took each victim to his house to later be raped and then murdered. Bryan is a seasoned reporter. He's covered some of the most gruesome crimes in El Salvador, and even he could hardly stomach the cruelty and viciousness described in this confession.
El hombre narraba con tal crudeza sus acciones que genuinamente sentí terror y asco.
There was something else unsettling about the document. Bryan noticed that the confession contained dates. The dates on which Hugo Osorio claims to have committed each of his crimes. Dates that contradicted the official story the government had just released. Days before, President Nayib Bukele had tweeted that the murders took place before his time in office. This leaked document flew in the face of all of that. While he'd been promoting the success of his campaign to crack down on violence in the country, this document revealed that more than a dozen murders were committed, and not just by anyone, by a former government employee, a national policeman. Bukele's carefully crafted image rested heavily on the success of his security plan. Recently, he'd started joking about being the world's coolest dictator. Did he mean it? It wasn't clear to Bryan and the Factum team how far he would go to protect his image. And Hugo Osorio's confession was a major revelation. But first, Bryan had to see if it was true. My name is Daniel Alvarenga. I'm a Salvadoran-American journalist. Join me and hear how the discovery of a mass grave in El Salvador uncovered a crisis of violence and corruption, reaching up to the highest levels of government. It's a crisis that I followed from afar, but that ended up touching close to home. For Sonoro Media, in collaboration with Revista Factum, this is Humo, Murder and Silence in El Salvador. Episode 2, The Confession. Along with the dates, the confession held another key piece of information. According to the document, the alleged murderer did not act alone. He raped, killed, and buried his victims with the help of accomplices. An informal trafficking ring of sorts, with him at the head. Sometimes, Osorio would leave victims alone with his accomplices while he went out for a walk, went to lunch, or simply went into another room. By the time he returned, the victims would be dead. But when it came time to get rid of the bodies, Osorio said that he was always present. For these services, he charges accomplices anywhere from $20 to $300. The leak also revealed the profile of the victims. Most of them were young, poor women he tricked into going to his house with the promise of a good job or financial support. It was the exact story he would use to capture 16-year-old Rina in March of 2021. According to the confession, Osorio met Rina in a small accessory store. Rina was a cheerful, giggly young woman. She had almond-shaped eyes and wavy black hair that fell over the dark skin of her shoulders. She'd been working for a few months selling handbags on the outskirts of Santana, 10 minutes from Chalchuapa, where Hugo Osorio's house was. What little she made, she gave to her mother to help around the house. One day, after a long day of work, Reina came home and told her mother that two men had approached her shop. They had made her an offer.
Pues por lo que ella me había dicho, era un señor de 55, 60 años, me dijo, y el otro que es como de unos 50 años, me dijo. Y que ellos le habían ofrecido el trabajo en Metrocentro.
That's Daisy Aguirre, Reina's mother. She met Bryan after the grave was discovered in Chalchuapa. She remembers Reina telling her about the two men, and her story perfectly matched what was in Osorio's confession. In his account, he approached the stall where Reina was working. He and his accomplice told her that they could get her a better job, selling cell phones out of a stand that had just opened up in Metrocentro, a shopping center in the heart of Santana. The confession says Reina gave her phone number to one of the men. For more than 2 weeks, Osorio tried to get Reina to accept the job offer. He called and texted her. Reina finally accepted the offer. On Sunday, March 28th, she headed out for what she thought would be her first day.
En la mañana se levantó, se bañó, se arregló, hice el desayuno, desayunamos las dos juntas y me dijo, ya me voy.
Daisy made her breakfast. She hugged her daughter goodbye. Neither knew it was the last time they would be together. Reina, like so many others, was convinced to meet Hugo Osorio. But instead of taking her to Metrocentro, they went to his house. There, in Estevez Alley, his accomplice was waiting. Once they had Reina inside, they admitted to the lie. The jig was up. They had not brought her to work at the cell phone stand. Instead, they wanted to see her because they liked her. The confession is not clear about what happens next. Osorio claims he left the house. When he returned, he said he heard screams in one of the rooms. He claims he saw his accomplice killing Reina because she had tried to run away. What happens after that is clear. The two men, Osorio and his accomplice, buried Reina's body in the backyard. And so, on Sunday, March 28th, 2021, what was supposed to be Reina's first day of work was the last day of her life. Back at the Factum newsroom, Bryan and the team of reporters were poring over the document. Osorio's confession was a bombshell, one that could put everyone in the newsroom in real danger. It wasn't just that this atrocity had occurred. This document showed that the government was lying. Bukele's security plan was a key part of his popularity. This document revealed that, while he was touting the success of his security plan, an ex-cop had murdered dozens of people. It tarnished his carefully crafted image. How far the Bukele administration would go to protect his image was unclear. The Factum team knew this report was also urgent for people like Daisy, who were still looking for their missing loved ones. The confession contained Osorio's MO, the ways in which he targeted his victims. If people knew how he operated, maybe the report could help them find their missing family members. But first, they needed to verify the document. It was leaked. It might be fake. And the government was saying that Osorio wasn't just a killer, he was a psychopath. They had to be extremely careful about what they did publish. So the team got to work. Bryan and his colleagues contacted several sources, traveled back to Chalchuapa on several occasions, and obtained classified documents about Hugo Osorio's past. To piece together the story of Osorio's past, Factum's team took a deep dive into police and public records. Then, later in the investigation, they gained access to millions and millions of leaked emails from the army and the police. The document had been made available to the public by a third-party site known as Guacamaya Leaks. It's a site run by anonymous activist hackers, or hacktivists, that publishes secret documents about governments across Latin America. Hugo Osorio was born on February 6, 1970, in the city of Chalchuapa. He stayed in school through 9th grade. Then, at 27, he joined the National Police Force. He worked for the police until 2005, when he was arrested for raping a minor. He was released after 5 years in prison. After being released, Osorio continued to live a life of crime. According to government documents from the Salvadoran police, authorities had been investigating Hugo Osorio since 2011. The police tracked Osorio's phone after finding a connection between him and a woman who had disappeared days prior. He was arrested red-handed in a mall, caught attempting to pay a 15-year-old minor for sex. At the time, Salvadoran police hypothesized that Osorio was part of a human trafficking network, a network of men who reached young teens from various parts of the country through social media, as well as a TV station called Star Channel in which people shared their phone numbers. The men in the network would convince these young women to meet, then take them to El Refugio, a community near the Guatemalan border. Authorities suspected that the network brought the young women into Guatemala to traffic them. That's why, in 2013, Salvadoran police coordinated with Guatemalan authorities on an investigation into the disappearances of 8 young women connected to Osorio. The documents we have been able to access are not clear on the outcome of the joint government investigation. Years later, in 2020, a judge issued an arrest warrant against Osorio for raping a minor, but records indicate he was not arrested. To recap, Osorio served 5 years in prison for rape. Upon his release, he was investigated for human trafficking, before being accused of rape once again. In the documents the team accessed, it is not clear if the various investigations against him concluded with legal action. We don't know why, after so many investigations, Osorio was never arrested. Somehow, he managed to evade punishment and go about his business while living just a few blocks away from Chalchuapa's police station. We contacted the Salvadoran police office for comment. After several attempts, they still have not responded. What we do know is that 10 years after these investigations, the mass grave in Chalchuapa was uncovered, and then Osorio confessed to burying more than 40 bodies in his own backyard. Government officials were quick to decry this the work of a madman, a psychopath. But during his time as a policeman and then in prison, the authorities never reached this assessment. So was it true? In October 2021, the media outlet El Faro published a psychological assessment of Osorio from his time in prison. Conducted by the Institute of Legal Medicine, a medical institution funded by the government to provide these services, it found that Osorio was able to distinguish right from wrong. He knew what he did was wrong, and still, he did it. So who was Hugo Osorio, if not a psychopath? Factum needed to hear from the people who actually knew him, the people closest to him. Finally, the Factum team was able to track down someone who knew him well. Very well.
Con permiso. Hola, buenos días.
Él es Gerson.
Hola, mucho gusto. Personaje. Con permiso.
Y él tenía varios hogares, tenía hijos, que yo le descubrí cuando yo le hablaba así.
This is Ana. That's not her real name. But to protect her privacy and her family's safety, we won't reveal personal information about her. Because Ana is Hugo Osorio's ex-girlfriend and the mother of several of his children. In the Factum team's conversation with her, they learned that there were many things about Osorio that Ana didn't know, like the fact that he had several homes with other women and had raised children with them. And while the news of the mass grave came as a shock to her, she recalled several times when Osorio showed aggressive behavior.
Él ya era así agresivo, él era bien pesado, porque cuando él quería que cuando él viniera aquí, que uno lo recibiera como siempre.
Ana and Osorio met 20 years ago when he was a police officer. He wasn't in uniform at the time, but he approached her and he warned her that she was being followed by thieves.
Él con la mentira que se me acercó fue de que a mí me venían persiguiendo unos ladrones.
But this was a lie. It was a ruse to get close to her and to get her to trust him. They became friends, and soon after, Ana got pregnant. They went on to have several children together. And still, they never lived in the same house. He would drop in sometimes, expecting Ana to prepare food for him. Often, these visits would turn violent.
Estaba el cuchillo ahí en la mesa y agarró el cuchillo, mire, y me lo puso por aquí.
Ana remembers when he held a knife to her throat.
Y yo me puse bien nerviosa y yo lo que hice fue que salirme para acá.
Then, when she tried to leave, he attacked her with a chair in front of their children.
Y los niños llorando. Y agarró una silla y me la aventó. No, sí, él era bien agresivo.
One neighbor remembers seeing Osorio attack Ana with pliers, throwing them at Ana's head with enough force to kill her.
Sí, y le aventó la tenaza de aquí a donde yo vivo. Y la tenaza le pasó rasando la cabeza, que si le hubiera dado con la tenaza, yo digo la mata.
But this violence was rarely seen by other people outside their home. Most of the people Factum interviewed described Osorio as a quiet man, friendly even.
Él era bien amigo. Amigo con todo.
Amable, digamos.
Amable con la gente.
Most of them never imagined that he would be capable of committing such heinous crimes.
Yo me quitaba el sombrero como amigo. Yo hasta la fecha yo no me lo creo.
But others had their suspicions. They saw a darkness lurking behind his seemingly pleasant demeanor.
Que él mucho hablaba de depravaciones. Las pláticas normales, ¿verdad? Que él le gustaban solo muchachas y que era bonito tenerlas.
By the time the mass grave was discovered, Ana and Osorio rarely saw each other.
Ya teníamos varios años de que solo
Years earlier, Ana had sued Osorio for child support, so their only contact would be the occasional visit to drop off money or food for their children. Ana heard about the mass grave and his arrest after a neighbor told her to watch the news. Since then, her life has changed. For more than a year, she and her children have lived with the fear and stigma of being connected to this man, to this alleged murderer. It started with dirty looks from neighbors, but quickly escalated. People would insult Ana's children when they would go out to play. Customers stopped buying from her small business. Eventually, she was forced to abandon her business and her home.
Yo me fui por miedo, por las habladurías de la gente que decían que me discriminaban.
And it wasn't just her
Por
neighbors.
eso fue que yo me fui de
Ana
aquí.
started seeing comments online. People urging that justice be delivered by hurting people close to Hugo Osorio, especially his children. There is no evidence linking Ana or her children to the case. Still, they are dealing with the fallout from Osorio's arrest. So much so that Ana is now hoping to leave the country with her kids. Few people knew that Osorio was abusive and a sexual predator. Even those who had their suspicions never imagined him capable of the heinous acts described in his confession. The rape and murder of dozens of young girls, women, and even an infant. The House of Horrors at number 11 in Estevez Alley was a black hole, one that swallowed almost anyone who entered. And Osorio acted with such impunity that he even confessed to killing his own nephew. He buried him in his own backyard, with dozens of other victims. Bryan worked closely with his Factum colleagues and a team of lawyers to prepare a report on the confession. He knew he had one shot. The report had to be airtight. It was part of an ongoing criminal investigation, and it contradicted what little the government had said about the case. They fact-checked and closely reviewed every line, every detail, taking great care to avoid re-victimizing the families of the dead. They omitted gruesome details. They shared their doubts about the accuracy of the report, about Osorio as a narrator. But there was no question. They needed to publish the report. The public needed to know exactly how Osorio was able to trap his victims, to commit these crimes. Jessica Avalos is the editor-in-chief of Revista Factum.
Pero lo que se puso fue en aras de que quien tuviera una persona desaparecida o alguna mujer que se encontrara con un tipo con un perfil así sepa identificar las señales de alerta y no se repita.
Factum also highlighted the discrepancy between the dates given in the confession and the official version of events from the government. The government had insisted that these crimes took place long before President Bukele's administration came to power. In 2020 and 2021, El Salvador saw a drop in homicides, one that President Bukele attributed to his security plan. The confession told a very different story, that 13 people were murdered by a former government official.
Pero cuando fui leyendo la relación de los hechos, empecé a darme cuenta que estos casos eran recientes, que eran las víctimas que estaban enterradas en la fosa de la casa de Osorio, las que se describían en ese documento. Al principio, la verdad, empecé
Most of the killings in Chachuapa were allegedly committed while the country was under a strict curfew to control the spread of COVID-19, a curfew that filled the streets with the police and the army. Bryan knew that even with the careful review and the input from lawyers, publishing the report was risky. The document was leaked. It told a different story than the version the government was telling publicly. And it was classified, since it was part of an ongoing investigation into Osorio's crimes. On all counts, it was clear the government wouldn't want it getting out. But that's exactly why he got into journalism, to provide this information, to hold institutions accountable when nobody else would. Factum published the report on Saturday, June 12, 2021, a month after Hugo Osorio had taken a plea deal. He'd been given a deferred judgment in exchange for his cooperation as a witness. The report was a bombshell. It took off on social media. It seemed like everybody, the whole country, was talking about it. The Monday morning following the publication, the Factum team was working from home. Bryan Avelar was getting ready to go for a walk when his phone buzzed. It was from a group chat with his editor, Jessica, and Factum director, Cesar Faguaga. One of them had to go into Factum's offices to receive something, an official message from the district attorney's office. Bryan sat back down. As it turns out, he didn't need to go to the office to know what the message would say. The district attorney's office had tweeted most of it. A court in Santa Ana was ordering the immediate withdrawal of the publication, to take the report down. The court claimed that Factum couldn't publish information in an ongoing criminal proceeding, and they warned Factum against publishing any more information about the alleged murderer's confession.
Ese tema no salió de un día para otro, se trabajó por semanas, lo releyó, lo revisó un abogado.
As Bryan's editor, Jessica wasn't convinced. They'd spent weeks reviewing the report with lawyers to make sure that they had standing to publish. But the court issued the order to take it down. Disobeying it was a crime, and the Factum team risked ending up in prison.
¿Por qué decidimos bajarlo? Porque creíamos que no existían las garantías para protegernos. No es porque creyéramos que no tuviéramos la razón.
Their hands were tied. Begrudgingly, they decided to remove the report from the website. We reached out to the local Santa Ana court and the district attorney's office for comment. none of them answered our inquiries about the reasons for the order.
En aquel momento no teníamos garantías ni en el sistema judicial ni en la fiscalía.
Jessica insists they didn't take it down because they were in the wrong, but they didn't feel like they had anyone to turn to defend their right to publish, their right to a free press. The government got what it wanted. Factum took down the report, but the report had already been picked up by reporters around the world. While the Salvadoran government could silence journalists within their own country, they had no control over the story's reach beyond its borders. Vice in the United States, Animal Político in Mexico, Divergentes in Nicaragua, No Ficción in Guatemala, they all published a report in solidarity with Factum. Around the world, millions of people were becoming aware of the gravity of the situation in El Salvador. Back in DC, I was horrified, but also glad to see US media covering it. It was a victory for Bryan and the Factum team, but that victory was short-lived. 2 days later, Bryan received another text, this time from a fellow journalist at another outlet. No quiero asustarte, pero me ha llegado un mensaje de una fuente que dice que hoy en la noche te pueden jalar. A warning. A source told him Bryan could be pulled, arrested, at any moment. Bryan sprang into action. He packed his laptop and the rest of his gear. He gave it to a friend for safekeeping, someone who lived far away from him and was unlikely to be searched. Next, he set about deleting things. The next thing he knew, it was already 10 p.m. Exhausted, Bryan curled up on his couch with his cell phone. He wiped personal information, messages from confidential sources, anything that could compromise their safety or his own. When he finished, he locked himself in his room to wait. Sitting there in his room late at night, Bryan thought to himself, if the government is reacting to the Chalchuapa revelations like this, what else are they hiding?
Humo, Murder and Silence in El Salvador is a Sonoro original series, in collaboration with Revista Factum. This episode was produced by Fernanda Estrada and Hannah Bottom, with the help of Sara Mota. Written by Fernanda Estrada, Bryan Avelar, and Sara Mota. Adaptation by Hannah Bottom and Tasha Sandoval. Hosted by Daniel Alvarenga. Edited by Rodrigo Crespo and Nick Milanes. The managing editor was Rodrigo Crespo. Reporting by Bryan Avelar, Fernando Romero, and Gerson Nájera. Factum's team coordination and editorial consulting by Horus Villacorta. Fact-checking by Evelyn Uribe. Tape sync by Gerson Nájera and Marvin Siliesar. Mix and sound design by Fernando